Hi there everyone, it's Katojan again. I'd like to start today with what I hope will be the first of a series of videos about vintage military firearms. I have been a collector of older military arms, primarily from the later black powder period through World War I and World War II into the early Cold War era, since a teenager. While there are many great YouTube and Patreon channels, particularly, that offer great detailed information and inside data on such topics, I thought I'd throw my own hat into the ring, as it were. Today, to start off, I would like to talk about the first state of the development, the semi-automatic carbine system Semenov, commonly referred to by the English transliteration of its original Russian language acronym as the SKS.
The SKS is a product of more than 5 decades of firearm design and testing. The first self-loading rifle was fielded by Denmark in 1896 and utilized a short recoil action in which both barrel and bolt moved to the rear upon the ignition of a chambered cartridge, and the forward action of the recoiled bolt was facilitated by the compression and decompression of a recoil spring behind the breech block.
The first thing I'd like you to notice about short recoil is that after the ignition of the cartridge, which you can see here on the right, the outline of the cartridge case, the bolt and barrel recoil together a short distance until the barrel stops and the bolt continues to recoil.
This self-loading design, upon which the Danish arm was based, originated with Hiram Maxim, the inventor of the famous, or infamous, Maxim gun in 1880.
In 1889, John Moses Browning developed an automatic firearm design whereby propellant gases generated by a fired cartridge would be tapped at the barrel and push a piston attached to a lever and connecting rod, itself connected in turn to the bolt. The lever and connecting rod, operating upon the piston, itself impinged upon by hot propellant gases, operated the bolt after the first shot. Browning's design can be further differentiated from Maxim's short recoil concept by the absence of reciprocating barrel movement. Here we see the 1892 patent John Moses Browning took out for his gas-operated design. Let's take a little bit of a closer look visually at the patent and see what was going on at the business end of the design at the muzzle. Here we see the muzzle end of the design featured in the patent number 471782. John Moses Browning used for his experiment a rifle that he had made several modifications to and eventually produced his own versions of them for the Winchester Company. According to legend at least, the inspiration for the design came from an incident in 1889 when, during a shooting competition in his home in Ogden, Utah, John Moses Browning and his brother Matthew noticed that another shooter, Will Wright, was firing a lever-action Winchester, much as you see in the patent, and the muzzle blast was actually flattening some prairie grass that was directly ahead of the rifle barrel. From there, John had an idea that the same muzzle blast that was flattening the grass could be harnessed to actually fire the weapon automatically. So as a consequence, he retired back to his workshop, came up with the idea of testing the theory with a block of wood, which he put a hole through for the bullet to go through. The block of wood was subsequently moved by the muzzle blast of the fired shot, and from there John proceeded to rig up, as you see in the patent, a flapper system which actuated a rod, which thus actuated the, if not the bolt directly, the lever of the lever action rifle to operate the bolt. Again, the design had a rigid barrel. Unlike Maxim's design, the barrel does not move. Only the flapper moves at the end of the barrel. Ethnically Czech Austro-Hungarian Ulan officer and inventor Adolf Otkolek von Uyetz dispensed with Browning's connecting rod and lever arrangement to cycle the action, though he retained the prolific American inventor's basic concept of using propellant gases to actuate autoloading. Herr Oldkolek used a piston within a tube underneath the barrel. The piston would directly connect with a breech block to start the action cycle. Though some subsequent military designers afterwards would place the gas piston tube atop the barrel rather than beneath it, the basic mechanics and functionality of all future guns using a piston to achieve self-loading fire was established. The modern gas piston-operated self-loading firearm was born. Here we see a diagram of typical gas port gas operation, as was patented by Oldkolek von Uyest. We see at the top the cartridge is chambered and ready to fire. You'll also notice there's a port or hole in the barrel that is connected by a small conduit to a gas tube, in this case above the barrel, but in Oldkolek's patent was below the barrel. Again, the hot propellant gases are driven up through the conduit into the gas tube, which then impinges upon the gas piston attached to the bolt and bolt carrier, working the action, extracting and ejecting the last round, and then chambering further round for firing. Work on autoloading designs in the Russian Empire began as early as the 1880s, when designer Konstantin Glinsky experimented with converting Model 1870 Berdan II rifles, then the current frontline Russian service arm, chambered in 10 by 58 R-millimeter black powder. The relatively slow-burning powder of the issue Berdan cartridge meant that autoloading bolt unlocking was difficult to achieve, and the project was abandoned. In 1907, Ukrainian-born Yakov Ustanovich Rochepe, an engineer working at the Sestorietsk arsenal near St. Petersburg, converted a Model 1891 three-line Mosin-Nagant rifle to a delayed blowback self-loading rifle. The high-power smokeless 7.62 by 54 R-millimeter cartridge used in the Model 1881 rifle made direct blowback, in which the rearward movement of the fired cartridge directly moves the breech block back as well, impractical. Although the use of a toggle arrangement to diffuse the power of the .311 caliber full-length rifle cartridge made the newly developed Rochepe arm fully safe and viable for use, the inherent suspicion toward automatic fire incumbent upon most great power militaries at the time did not bode well for his creation.
I'd like to draw your attention to this repeating GIF of a P08 Luger firing. In particular, I'd like to draw your attention to the toggle lock. You can see it hinging upwards each time the pistol fires. This is a form of delayed blowback action, and this is the same kind of design used by Yakov Rochepe, albeit in his reworking of the Mosin-Nagant rifle and not a pistol. Essentially, it works like this. There's no positive locking or camming surface in the bolt group or in the barrel or receiver. So essentially the toggle joint is rigid when it's not bent. Very little in the way of force can actually hinge that toggle lock. However, cam surfaces on the rear of the receiver can hinge the toggle lock upwards, but by the time the toggle lock is actually moved upwards, i.e. by the time in which the breech is actually opened and out of battery, chamber pressures have decreased to such a point as to be by now safe to the firer. This, in essence, is the toggle lock action used by Rochepe.
Rochepe's design, coincidentally, was developed the same year as the delayed blowback principle that was successfully received by Austro-Hungarian ordnance authorities and issued in their M1907 Schwarzlose machine gun, fielded by their armed forces. In the same year, Russian Fyodor Tokarev, the son of Don Cossacks, working at the Imperial Russian Army's Oranienbaum Officers' Musketry School, also developed a semi-automatic version of the three-line rifle. Later, in 1913, Vladimir Fedorov, a colleague of Tokarev's and other engineers at Sestorietsk Arsenal, developed a short recoil rifle chambered in the 6.5 by 50 mm Arisaka round, which had been used against Russia during the 1904 to 1905 war with Japan. Born in 1874, Fedorov joined the Russian Army and later graduated from the Mikhailovskoye Artillery School and then served as a platoon commander in the 1st Guards Artillery Brigade. After graduation from Mikhailovskoye Artillery Academy in 1800,
a place of learning
for military officers pursuing the early modern equivalent of graduate-level studies in military engineering related to artillery and small arms, Fedorov entered the Artillery Committee of the Main Artillery Directorate, the Russian Army's main center of artillery and small arms research and development. The 1913 design came after Fedorov had developed several automatic rifle designs, some from the M1891 three-line Mosin-Nagant rifle, similar to that also developed by Rochepet. His rifle incorporated a form of short recoil operation, again, wherein the barrel recoils less than an eighth of an inch with the receiver and bolt, which allows for unlocking after firing, whereupon the inertia imparted to the recoil spring finishes ejecting the sprint cartridge case, recocking the hammer for firing, or the firing pin, and moving the bolt forward until final lockup into battery for the next shot. The rifle also used two circular locking cams, which rotated in circular bearing areas in the bolt carrier, and were attached to a wedge on their bottom sides, which locked into a recess in the receiver. In essence, the rifle used the same principle as a wedge-locking early M1886 or M1888 or M1888-93 Austria-Hungarian Mannlicher straight pull rifle, but without a wedge in line with the rest of the bolt body, and instead had its locking cams placed at the side of the bolt assembly. This form of locking the bolt is essentially known as tilting bolt locking, versus a method of locking wherein the bolt cams in and out of locking slots in the receiver or barrel extension, as on the later AK-47 rifles or on the AR-15 design. The Japanese cartridge used in the design was only semi-rimmed in comparison to the then standard 7.62 by 54R loading used by the frontline Russian soldier. This feature made the 1913 Fedorov design easier to feed, and the 6.5mm ammunition had better ballistic qualities, notably a flatter trajectory.